Hello, my name is Oscar Fire, and it's been a little while since I recorded one of these, but I still haven't edited either of the episodes of my Legends of Shannara, so I'm a little behind on that. We're not going to talk about that. Anyway, hello, my name is Oscar Fire, and today we are going to talk about The Dark Legacy of Shannara, Wards of Faerie, the first book in the trilogy. I'm not going to lie, I have been very distracted of late, because I mean, it'd be weird to blame my job, because it's not like I'm doing a super amount more than I was before, since I got a minor promotion, but at the same time, it still takes a lot of brain power, and I'm also waking up earlier, which is something I'm definitely not fond of. I don't like waking up super early. I'm just kind of putting up with it because, it's more money. But, it is kind of put a little bit of a crimp in some of the things I really kind of would like to do a little more, and that includes making YouTube videos. Because even though, the channel is technically in a semi-retired state, I would still like to, occasionally make things. I like occasionally make book reviews, and I occasionally like to make, other YouTube videos. Like I have several Lethal Company episodes that are still pending for me to actually edit. I wanted to try and make a Marvel Rivals video of my first experience playing the game, and that did not go well. Actually, Marvel Rivals is a little too potent for my computer, and NVIDIA's recent update to its program, to its recording software, messed up my settings, so it recorded my audio wrong. So that was fun. I was very happy about that. I really loved that. It made me really joyful. Anyway, but yeah, so I'm here to talk about Wards of Faerie. So fun fact, I actually finished this a couple of weeks ago, actually several weeks ago, because I'm reading this a lot slower than I read any of the previous series. But I am like almost a third of the way through the second book already, and I'm hoping that when I talk about this, I don't inadvertently fuse the knowledge I have restored to my memory. I'm hoping that I hope I don't inadvertently fuse that knowledge of the second book to my talking about the first book. Not that it's totally relevant, actually, because part of the problem is that because this is a much more recent book, I am much more familiar, not just with what happens in the novel, in the trilogy, but I also remember how I felt a lot more keenly than I do for most of the previous series, and that has let's just say it's impacting my ability to actually enjoy the novels in and of themselves. Now, granted, I'm enjoying them. Of course, I'm going to be enjoying them less and less because the later the Shannara saga goes, the worse the books get. Especially towards the end. But that doesn't mean there isn't value in Dark Legacy. Because I'll tell you right now, this first book is really good setup. I really enjoy the setup of it. We're back finally in a lot of ways to having a classic Shannara adventure, right? Where it's like, there's a magical talisman where it's good or evil or whatever. And it's like we gotta go on a quest to get it, to get that talisman back, right? It feels much more like a classic tale, and it's kind of it's frustrating to me how I know that it's just going to end in disappointment. But taking what happens in Wards of Faerie on its own, for the most part, the story is actually really good. It's actually really solid. It's not better, I think, than a lot of the classic Shannara books, but it's in a lot of ways closer to what the classic Shannara books felt like than than what comes after it, especially. But even some of what comes before, like I mentioned that, for example, the Voyage of the Girl Shannara, the way it kind of pans out is a little bit Voyage is kind of a bad one, a kind of bad example. Actually, it's probably more like High Druid. Kind of feels a little bit wonky, even though it's a good, well-told story. But here, it's like I remember when I first read it, and I felt it again, honestly, reading this, that the revelation that there were more elf stones, not just the set of the blue elf stones and the black elf stone, but that there were other colors of elf stones was an incredibly intriguing promise. And the idea, that this ancient magic that's been missing for thousands of years might be rediscovered again. Great premise. I also thought that this series did a very good job of handling the intrigue and internal politics of the Federation. Even though I'm not overly fond of that, I find that a lot of that kind of boring, and it represents a kind of a weird, almost side quest on Terry's part when it comes to writing some of his latest stories, where he's overly enamored with the idea of showing the reader what's going on with the Federation. Like, there comes a point where I don't care. Like, if you really want to give me politics, just give me the elves, give me the dwarves, give me the trolls. But I don't care about the Federation. I don't care about an oligarchic authoritarian regime at all. It's like, it's too modern almost, is a way to put it. It's almost too modern, because it kind of just feels like, oh, we're just in Russia, It's just Russia in the year 5000. I don't see why precisely Terry himself is so obsessed with it. But at the same time, that's kind of drawing into complaints I have about Defenders and Fall of Shannara. But yeah, I'm just like, but at the same time, I like this one. I like how it's handled in this one. I like the the power struggles and the wheels between wheels. Just Chazul, the first prime minister that in this book, before he gets murdered by the man who's his confidant, Stoon the assassin. Drus Chazul is kind of a little bit more of an idiot, I think, than he has any right to be. He doesn't come across. I mean, part of that, of course, is the way the story's written. He's supposed to be a man who is a little bit more ambitious than he has any right to be, and who's a little more stupid than he realizes he is. That's certainly an element of the story that can't be discounted or ignored. But at the same time, it feels like he's a touch too stupid. When he decides to attack the understaffed Paranor, with his, I guess, small army technically of about 1,000 men, and he fails miserably. It's like it feels like he's a little too stupid for his own good. Like, he doesn't like magic, and he wants technology to rise in the Four Lands again. But I am struck by the fact that he grossly underestimates the power of magic. It's like, if he really hates magic that much, then he should be smart enough to recognize how dangerous magic is, and how his goals, while not necessarily untenable, are definitely difficult objectives for him to want to achieve. And it doesn't feel like anyone who rises to the position of Prime Minister, even through all the wheeling and dealing that he does, it doesn't feel like that anyone who manages to get that far would really be quite that dumb. But again, it's not that bad. It's not that bad. It is definitely interesting and intriguing, and I wasn't like riveted to the pages reading about it, but I definitely was like I was thinking in my head as I was rereading, I'm like, how does this go? How did this end again? How does Drus Chazul end? I feel like he isn't in the latter two books, but I don't remember how he's not in the latter two books. So there's that. What was I going to say? Ah, yes, I remember. Then there's the matter of the druids. And this is a more frustrating meta commentary I have, which is that I don't understand why Terry seems to have forgotten that in a lot of ways the magic is the point of Shannara. You know, it's not... you know, like, the magic is what made Shannara cool. It was the druids, it was the elf stones, it was the Elchris, you know, it was the Shadowin, stuff like that. That was the stuff that made Shannara cool. And Terry seems to have forgotten that at some point towards the, you know, as he got into the later, as he got into the tail end of his series. He seems to have forgotten that magic is what made his universe cool. And the way magic worked was what made his universe unique. Because I started to notice as I was reading this first book that it's like, oh, the Druid Order under Kyber Alesidil has gone from being moderately powerful to very weak. To basically being, you know, whittled down to half a dozen individuals in... you know, holed up in Paranor with a couple of dozen druid guards and a scribe, a secretary in many ways. And it's very irksome to me, honestly, that that's how he handles a druid order. There's almost no situation, there's no time in the history of the druids in the Shannara saga where the druids are strong, except defenders of Shannara, if you ever really think about it. Because how does it go? In the first King of Shannara, the druids are destroyed by treachery from within, right? In the original Shannara trilogy, Alanon is the only druid, and he dies, and the druids go away for 300 years. In the Heritage of Shannara, there's finally some hope again as Walker Bow becomes the first druid in 3 centuries. In the Voyage of the Gerald Shannara, the druids haven't been restored because Walker Bow failed to do something about it. In the High Druid of Shannara, it's the first time we get to see the druids actually be somewhat strong, but they are hamstrung by the fact that there's a lot of internal politicking in the order, and Grianne Omsford is not exactly the most loved individual on the planet. Then we have Dark Legacy of Shannara, where the druids are weak. Defenders of Shannara is the only time the druids are actually strong, and they actually have multiple members, and they are actually doing the things that they want to do. You know, be mediators, discover magic, etc. Fall of Shannara, it's just First King all over again, where they are betrayed from within and destroyed. And it's really frustrating to me that that's how Terry handles his... you know, his magic, the magic wielders of his universe. Because there's no reason for it, I think. I feel like it would have been nice to have one story where the druids aren't just 2 or 3 people or aren't being undermined from within. And where, when they are strong, they actually matter. But it's like Terry forgot. It's like Terry doesn't realize that, or it's like, no, that's not what I want to say. What I want to say is that it's like it's like on some level maybe he realized that when the druids are strong, the druids kind of can solve a lot of problems with their power, and it forces him to make a much stronger opponent to like fight against. But even then, I don't see how that's the problem here, because the Demons of the Forbidding, and we're jumping ahead a little bit, but the Demons of the Forbidding are going to be the primary antagonist of this story. And it's like he wanted, and it's like in order to create, it's like he couldn't, in his head, he couldn't create the necessary conflict that he wanted to create without making the druids weak. And it's just, but that's a disappointment for the reader, who I think for most readers of the Shannara saga, they want to see the druids be strong at least once. And I mean, sure, Terry can create if he wants to, he can create the conflict between magic and technology. That's fine. Magic and science, I should say, rather. You know, he can create that conflict if he wants, but it's like by the time he was writing this in the 2010s, he was no longer clever enough or he was no longer like clever enough, or like, I don't want to say smart enough, because I'm not, I don't want to think I want to call him an idiot. He's not an idiot, but he wasn't clever enough to make the story that he almost needed to make the story where the druids get to be powerful and the druids get to be a force in the Four Lands. And I just find that really disappointing. I find that failure to like kind of meet that potential, to kind of rise to that potential. I just find that super, super disappointing, and it's just, and it depresses me, because it's going to like kind of like what I feel like about Wards of Faerie. There's a lot of potential in this story. And the fact that he doesn't, I think, live up to that the story doesn't live up to that potential is just super, a big letdown. It's a big, big letdown. You know? And realistically, that's really the sum total of what I want to say, because, I mean, I could talk about how not the main character of the story, but that's something else that did bother me, but I kind of don't want to talk about it, which is kind of just another weird injection of modern day politics into the story. But I almost don't want to talk about that, because I feel like I did enough of talking about that in Genesis. This is a much more minor thing. It's just a couple of paragraphs, and I don't really want to get hung up on that for like 3-4 minutes. It's not really necessary. It's weird, but it's not necessary. But the other thing is just the way Kyber Elesidil behaves, where she basically becomes obsessed with finding the Elf Stones, but the story, the narrative, doesn't play it out correctly, and it just kind of turns her into an asshole for no reason, because she drives her, she drives her exploration company, you know, the majority of the druids, part of the druid guard, a bunch of rovers. She drives them forward into deadly situations trying to find the Elf Stones. And of course, this is what, at the very end, gets them trapped in the Forbidding. But but no attempt is made, really, to make this a plausible, this is how Kyber Elesidil will behave. It just kind of randomly makes her behave like a bitch, without actually adequately building her character into someone who goes from, well, this is, you know, like, well, this sounds like a very risky proposition, to, you know, we must complete this mission at all costs, no matter who hurts or who hurts, who gets hurt or who dies. And it's just, you know, which I find kind of disappointing, because it feels like it's a bit of a character assassination of a character who was genuinely a very good character in the High Druid of Shannara, you know, 100 years earlier. You know? And it's all just kind of sad, because at the end of the day, I could praise this book all I want, but I know that in 2 books' time, I'm going to be so upset that it's not even funny. And that's really frustrating, you know, because there's a lot of good character work here too. You know, I think that Aethinglo Elesidil, you know, the new young druid, is actually a pretty intriguing character. You know, though I don't know, though rereading it, I'm not sure how well written she is in hindsight, but she's definitely one of the better written characters in this story. So I can't ignore that. I think that the Omsford twins are pretty. Actually, no, I don't think they're pretty good. Actually, I think they're pretty juvenile, but at least they're young and they're meant to be juvenile. Same thing with Mirai Leah. Leah, the first female main character, I think. I don't know. Though that does bring me up to another. Well, actually, I can't talk about that, because that doesn't really occur in this book, and I'll address it more in the next video, actually. I will definitely remember what it is, because it's been frustrating me since this book, but it's not half as important as it's going to be in the next book. So I'm going to leave it there. Thank you for watching this review. These aren't really reviews, if we're being perfectly honest. They're actually just they're really more just kind of my surface level thoughts from reading the books. But and honest to goodness, I know on some level they're just getting more disappointing, and I may not redo Defenders and Fall of Shannara, but I feel like I should. That's the thing. I feel like I should redo Defenders and Fall, because like when I first, I mean, granted, I only read last book of the Fall of Shannara. When did it come out? 2022. So it's not like that's particularly burdensome to me or anything, you know what I mean? But at the same time, it just feels like having, rereading the entire Shannara series, in the past few years, it'll give me some extra perspective and insight that I didn't have before. And I can compare. I think I can more fairly compare Defenders and Fall of Shannara to the many earlier entries in the series, if I reread them now. So I'm probably still going to do it, even though I'm definitely kind of getting a little bored of doing this, if only because the books are so much less enjoyable now than they were before. So anyway, thank you for watching. Hope you enjoyed. And until next time, everybody.